He yanked her mother's pendant right off her neck while the casket was still being lowered into the ground. The clasp tore her skin. Blood ran down her collarbone. Then he walked 3 steps to his mistress, clasped it around her throat like a trophy, and kissed her forehead over the open grave. His mother watched from her seat and said nothing. His sister tilted her head and smirked. Not one person moved. And the woman standing there, bleeding into her black dress, the woman every single person at that graveside believed had nothing. She touched the blood on her neck with 2 fingers and smiled. Because 1 hour ago, she had become worth $65 billion. And she was the only one who knew it. But I am not starting there. I am starting with what came before. Because you need to understand exactly who they thought she was. And exactly who she actually is. Rachel Whitfield grew up in a clapboard house outside Harlan, South Carolina. Just her and her grandmother, Mabel. No father in the picture. No siblings. No cousins down the road. The house had a porch with a creaky swing, a kitchen that always smelled like cinnamon and cast iron, and a garden out back where Mabel grew tomatoes and collard greens and yellow squash like her life depended on it. They did not have much. At least not in the way the world measures having. But Mabel never let Rachel feel poor. She pressed Rachel's school uniforms with military precision, braided her hair every Sunday night while gospel played on a radio that only picked up 2 stations, and read to her from old novels picked up at yard sales. Books by writers who understood what it meant to carry more inside you than the world was willing to see. She raised Rachel like she was preparing her for something. Something important. Something neither of them could say out loud yet. On Saturdays, Mabel would take Rachel to the public library in town. They would walk the half-mile together, hand in hand, and Mabel would sit in the corner while Rachel pulled books off the shelves like she was searching for buried treasure. "Read everything," Mabel would say. "The world is going to try to tell you who you are. Books will show you who you can be." And every single day, without exception, Mabel wore a gold oval pendant around her neck. Rachel asked about it once when she was 9 years old, sitting on the kitchen counter while her mother made oatmeal. Mabel smiled, touched the pendant gently, and said, "This was your mama's. One day, it will be yours. And when it is yours, you will understand what it really holds." Rachel did not push. Even at 9, she understood that her grandmother held things close. Not out of secrecy, out of protection, like a bird sitting on an egg. Not because it is hiding it, but because it is not ready to fly yet. Rachel's parents died when she was 7. A car accident on a rainy Tuesday night. A delivery truck ran a red light 3 blocks from their apartment. They were pronounced dead before the ambulance reached the hospital. Mabel got the call at work. She finished mopping the floor she was on. Then she clocked out, took the bus home, pulled Rachel from the neighbor's couch where she was sleeping, and held her until the sun came up. She did not have money for therapy. She did not have words for grief counseling. She had a Bible, a kitchen table, and one rule that she spoke into Rachel's life like a commandment. Never let the world see you break, baby. You cry at home. Outside, you stand. That rule became the foundation of everything Rachel would ever become. What Rachel did not know at 9, what Mabel never fully explained because Mabel herself barely understood the scope of it, was that Rachel's mother, Eleanor Hargrove, was not simply a woman who died too young. Eleanor had been a research chemist. Brilliant, methodical, quiet in the way that only deeply intelligent people can be. In her late 20s, working nights in a university lab while raising Rachel during the day, she co-developed a pharmaceutical compound that became the biochemical backbone of a global biotech patent. Her research partner commercialized the technology. Eleanor stepped back. She did not want boardrooms. She did not want press conferences. She wanted her daughter, her small garden behind the apartment, and her peace. But Eleanor was not reckless with her future. Before she died, she did one thing that would reshape Rachel's entire existence. She placed her complete share of the patent, the royalties, the equity stake, the licensing rights across every territory into a blind trust. She appointed a single attorney as trustee. She named one beneficiary, her daughter, Rachel Hargrove. The trust was sealed and would remain untouched until Rachel turned 18. And the pendant. The gold oval pendant that Mabel wore every day for 30 years. It was the key. Not literally, but symbolically. It was the thread that connected 3 generations. Grandmother to mother to daughter. A covenant pressed into gold and passed from hand to hand by women who chose dignity over volume and let the world underestimate them on purpose. The night before Mabel died, she lifted that pendant from her own neck with trembling fingers and placed it around Rachel's. Her last words were a whisper. "Keep it close, baby. Mr. Pemberton will explain everything." Rachel did not know what that meant yet. She had not had time to figure it out. The grief was too heavy, the arrangements too endless. So she just held the pendant against her chest and felt the warmth of something her mother's hands had touched every day. It was the last warm thing Mabel ever gave her. Now let me tell you about the man she married. Rachel earned a full academic scholarship to college, studied social work, and graduated near the top of her class. She had plans, a career in community development, a desire to build mentorship programs for girls from towns like hers, towns where brilliance got buried under circumstance. Then she met Callum. It was at a homecoming mixer senior year. He was visiting from a neighboring school, tall, broad-shouldered, smooth-talking, with a voice that made promises sound like guarantees. He told Rachel she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. And Rachel, who had never been told that by anyone other than her grandmother, believed him. Not because she was naive, because she wanted it to be true. They married 2 years later. A courthouse ceremony on a Wednesday afternoon. $40 rings from a pawn shop and a cake from the grocery store bakery. Mabel came up from Harlan, wearing a pressed lavender dress and the pendant around her neck. She hugged Callum at the altar, looked him in the eye, and said, "Take care of my baby." Callum smiled his best smile and said, "Always." He did not. The first year was sweet enough. Callum brought flowers sometimes, called her beautiful in front of his friends. But even then there were cracks, hairline fractures, that Rachel chose not to see because she was in love. And love makes architects out of everyone, building bridges over gaps that should have been warnings. By year 3, the flowers had stopped. By year 5, so had the compliments. By year 8, Callum spoke to Rachel the way people speak to furniture. Only when he needed something moved. Rachel put her career on hold. Callum said it was temporary, just a year or 2, until his real estate firm got off the ground. He needed help with the books, the calls, the scheduling. Rachel believed him. She handled everything behind the scenes while Callum stood in front of every camera and handshake. She cooked dinner every night. She pressed his shirts the way Mabel taught her. She waited up for him when he came home late, smelling like bourbon and perfume that was not hers. She never said a word. Callum's mother, Lorraine, visited once a month and never missed an opportunity to remind Rachel where she came from. "You know, Callum could have married a doctor," she would say over dinner that Rachel cooked. "And that little country accent of yours. You really should work on that, sweetheart. It is not a good look for Callum's events." Callum's sister, Monica, was worse. She would sit at Rachel's table, eat her food, drink her wine, and then post on social media about how her brother deserved someone on his level. Callum never defended Rachel. Not once. Not at dinner, not at parties, not when his mother called Rachel the country girl to her face. He would just shrug and change the subject. Like Rachel's dignity was a conversation he did not have time for. Over the years, his small firm grew just enough to feed his ego, but never enough to match it. He bought suits he could not quite afford, leased cars a bracket above his income, started referring to Rachel in public as my wife, with the same tone people use when they say, my old couch. A thing they kept around because replacing it took effort. And through all of it, through every insult, every silence, every night she ate alone, Mabel called every Sunday. Same time, same gentle voice. "How you doing, baby?" And Rachel would press the phone to her ear and lie. "I am fine, Mama." And Mabel would pause, That long, knowing pause that only grandmothers can hold and say, "You are stronger than you know, baby. One day you will see." Then Callum brought another woman into their life. Her name was Tessa. She came from Atlanta, or at least that was what she told people. She called herself a real estate investor. She was sharp, stunning, and surgically calculated. She wore confidence like body armor and used flattery like a precision instrument. The night she met Callum at a networking mixer in a downtown hotel lobby, she identified his two greatest weaknesses within 20 minutes of conversation: his ego and his insecurity. And she decided right there, with a glass of red wine in her hand, that she would feed both until he could not tell the difference between her voice and his own thoughts. Within 6 months, Callum was spending more evenings with Tessa than with his own family. Within a year, the affair was an open secret, known by every relative, every friend, every neighbor, but acknowledged by none. Lorraine made everything worse. She invited Tessa to Sunday dinners. She introduced Tessa to church friends as Callum's lovely colleague. She placed Tessa next to Callum at the Thanksgiving table and moved Rachel to the far end near the children, as if she were hired help rather than the mother of Callum's kids. She compared them openly. Tessa's style, Tessa's confidence, Tessa's ambition. While Rachel sat at the end of the table, with her hands folded and her jaw locked tight. One evening at a summer barbecue, Lorraine stood in the backyard surrounded by cousins and aunts and said loudly enough for Rachel to hear through the screen door, "That woman is a charity case. Always has been. My son carries her on his back like a sack of flour. Lord knows what he sees in her." The cousins chuckled. Someone clinked a beer bottle. Nobody disagreed. Rachel set her plate on the counter, walked inside, locked herself in the bathroom, and pressed her forehead against the cold tile wall. She held the gold pendant against her lips and whispered words she had never spoken aloud. "How much longer do I have to be quiet, Grandma? How much longer?" Then Mabel got sick. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Diagnosed on a Wednesday, given 6 months on a Thursday. Rachel started driving down to South Carolina every single weekend. 6 hours each way. She would leave before the sun came up and arrive just in time to cook Mabel breakfast that she could barely eat. She would braid her grandmother's thinning hair. She would wash her linens. She would sit on the porch swing and hold her hand while the crickets filled the silence between them. Callum never came. Not once. He said hospitals made him uncomfortable. He said funerals were not his thing. He said South Carolina was too far for a weekend trip. But he had no trouble driving 2 hours to a jazz lounge in Savannah with Tessa 3 Saturdays in a row. Mabel died on a Monday evening just before sunset. The room was quiet. Rachel was sitting beside the bed, holding her grandmother's hand, watching the orange light from the window move slowly across the wall. The air smelled like lavender. Rachel had put fresh sprigs on the nightstand that morning because Mabel once told her lavender reminded her of her own mother. The circle of it. The completeness. 3 women connected by scent and memory, and a pendant that carried more weight than any of them ever said out loud. Mabel opened her eyes one last time. They were clear, focused, like she had been saving her last bit of strength for this exact moment. She looked at Rachel and whispered, "The pendant, baby. Keep it close. Mr. Pemberton will explain everything." Then she closed her eyes. And the room got very, very still. Now we are back at the graveside. The funeral was held at a small cemetery on the outskirts of Atlanta, a place called Greenfield Rest, quiet, tucked behind a row of Georgia pines. Rachel had organized everything herself, made every phone call, signed every check, arranged for a white canopy, 40 folding chairs, and a single bouquet of white lilies resting on the closed half of the casket. Rachel stood at the front of the grave in a simple black dress, her hands folded in front of her, her back straight, even though her heart was in pieces. No jewelry except one piece, the gold oval pendant that hung just below her collarbone. Her grandmother's pendant. Callum arrived 20 minutes late. He pulled up in a black SUV with tinted windows. The kind of entrance that belonged at a nightclub, not a burial. He stepped out in a tailored charcoal suit, sunglasses on, even though the sky was overcast. His cologne reached the canopy before he did, and he was not alone. Walking beside him, arm looped through his, was Tessa. She wore a cream-colored dress to a funeral, not out of ignorance, out of intention. Everything about her arrival said, "I belong here more than you do." Callum did not sit next to Rachel. He did not touch her shoulder. He did not nod in her direction. He walked to the opposite side of the open grave, positioned himself behind the chairs, and leaned into Tessa's ear during the pastor's opening prayer. He whispered something. She smiled. He chuckled softly. At a funeral, Lorraine sat 3 rows back, with her legs crossed and her chin lifted like she was evaluating a restaurant she might not return to. Monica sat beside her, scrolling through her phone during the eulogy, her face flat with boredom. Like burying someone's grandmother was an inconvenience in her afternoon. Nobody from Callum's side said a word to Rachel. Not a hug, not a glance, not even a nod across the casket. She was surrounded by people and had never felt more alone in her life. The pastor finished his final words. The cemetery workers began lowering the casket slowly into the ground, the ropes creaking under the weight. Rachel stood at the edge, her fingers wrapped around the pendant, her lips trembling, but her eyes dry. She had cried everything out the night before, alone in her grandmother's kitchen, sitting on the floor with her back against the cabinet, sobbing so hard she could not breathe. Now all she had left was stillness, a kind of quiet that did not feel like peace. It felt like the space between lightning and thunder. Then Callum moved. He walked around the grave slowly, deliberately, each step measured like a man who was used to being watched and enjoyed it. His shoes crunched against the gravel. His shadow fell across Rachel before he did. He stopped in front of her, looked down at the pendant hanging at her throat, and without saying a single word, grabbed it. He yanked it so hard the clasp snapped. The thin gold chain whipped against the back of her neck, and a thin line of blood appeared along her collarbone. Rachel gasped. Not from pain, from disbelief, from the fact that this man she had given 15 years to, would do this here, now, over her grandmother's open grave. Callum held the pendant up in the light for a moment, like he was inspecting something he had bought at a pawn shop. Then he turned his back on his wife, walked 3 steps to Tessa, and clasped the pendant around her neck. Right there, with Mabel's body still being lowered into the earth below them. Tessa smiled. She touched the pendant with her fingertips, adjusted it against her collarbone. Then she looked at Rachel with a gaze that was not cruel, exactly. It was worse than cruel. It was dismissive. It said, "This is mine now, and so is he." Lorraine watched from her seat and said nothing. Monica tilted her head and smirked like she was watching a scene in a movie she had already predicted. And Rachel touched the blood on her collarbone with 2 fingers. She looked at Callum. She looked at Tessa. She looked at Lorraine and Monica. She looked at every single person standing around that grave who had just watched a man desecrate his wife's grief in broad daylight. And she smiled. Not a broken smile, not a defeated smile, not the smile of a woman trying to hold herself together. It was a knowing smile. The kind of smile that says, you have no idea what is coming. Because 1 hour before this funeral, while Rachel sat alone in her grandmother's kitchen going through a stack of old papers and unopened mail, her phone had rung. The caller ID showed a number she did not recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail. But something made her answer. The man on the line introduced himself as Philip Pemberton, attorney at law, executor of the estate of Mabel Ann Hargrove. He said he had been Mabel's legal representative for over 20 years, and that he needed to speak with Rachel urgently regarding her inheritance. Rachel almost laughed. Inheritance. Her grandmother lived in a 3-bedroom clapboard house with a leaky porch roof. She drove a 12-year-old sedan. She wore the same 3 dresses on rotation and thought a splurge was buying name-brand tea bags instead of generic. But Philip Pemberton was not joking, and what he told her made Rachel set the phone down on the kitchen counter and stare at the wall for 3 full minutes without blinking. Her grandmother, the woman who scrubbed other people's floors for a living, who clipped coupons from the Sunday paper, who told Rachel that money was not everything, as long as you had character, was the silent majority shareholder of Hargrove Global Mining, a mineral and rare earth extraction conglomerate operating across 3 continents. The kind of company that built roads and moved mountains. Valued as of that morning's market open at just over $65 billion. And the story went back further than Mabel. Rachel's great-grandmother, a woman named Estelle Hargrove, had been one of the original silent investors in a mining venture launched in the early 1960s. Back when Black Americans were shut out of every boardroom, every bank, and every investment table in the country, Estelle found a way in through a blind trust structure that kept her name off the public filings. She invested what would have been worth roughly $40,000 at the time. A staggering sum in that era. Money she had saved working 3 jobs for 2 decades. Over 60 years, that stake had quietly compounded into the controlling interest of what was now called Hargrove Global Mining. Mabel inherited it all when Estelle passed. She never touched a dime, never moved a single share. She lived as a housekeeper by choice, not because she was ignorant of the money, but because she understood something most people never learn. She did not trust wealth to protect her granddaughter. She trusted character. She wanted Rachel to build her spine in the real world, not behind the walls of a fortune she did not earn. And she wanted to see, really see, who would stand beside Rachel when they thought there was nothing to gain. Everything belonged to Rachel now. Every share, every asset, every account, every seat at every table. A fortune built in silence across 3 generations of women who never needed the world to see them, to know exactly who they were. Rachel said nothing at the funeral after that call. She wiped the blood from her neck with her thumb. She watched Callum kiss Tessa's forehead over her grandmother's grave. She turned, walked to her car alone, and drove away without looking back. She went home, her grandmother's house. She sat in Mabel's rocking chair. She drank tea from Mabel's chipped yellow cup, and she did not speak for 2 full days. She just sat and breathed and let the grief settle into her bones like rain into dry soil. Back in Atlanta, things got worse. Callum had fully moved Tessa into their social circle. He brought her to business dinners and introduced her as his associate. He walked into rooms with her on his arm like Rachel did not exist. Tessa wore the pendant everywhere, to brunches, to networking mixers, to Callum's office happy hours, like costume jewelry, like a trinket from a gift shop, like it had not been the only thing a dying woman left behind for her only granddaughter. Lorraine called Rachel 3 times that week. Each call was worse than the last. Stop making things difficult. Let Callum be happy. You are holding on to something that is already gone. Sweetheart, move on. Her voice carried that particular kind of cruelty that wraps itself in concern. The kind that says, I care, while twisting the knife. Monica posted a photo of Callum and Tessa at a rooftop restaurant. Tessa was laughing, head thrown back, champagne in one hand, the pendant catching the light against her bare neckline. Monica captioned it, My brother finally found his match. Some people just fit. Rachel saw the photo at 2 a.m. She was sitting on the floor of her grandmother's kitchen, surrounded by old papers. She stared at that image for a long time, at the pendant, at Tessa's smile, at the way Callum's arm wrapped around her waist like he had never been happier. Then Rachel closed her phone, put her forehead on her knees, and let the grief swallow her whole. Not just grief for her grandmother. Grief for the years, for the silence, for the 15 years of marriage she had spent holding together a man who was busy tearing her apart. On the 4th night, Callum called. Not to check on her. Not to ask if she had eaten. To deliver instructions. His voice was flat. Almost bored. Listen, Rachel. I need you to come back to Atlanta and sign some papers. I am restructuring the house, making some changes. And honestly, I think it is time we talked about the future. Rachel asked him what he meant by the future. And Callum said the words that would echo in her skull long after he hung up. Your grandma is gone. You have got nothing now. No family, no money, no purpose. Just sign the papers and go quietly. Make it easy on both of us." That sentence landed like a fist through glass. Not because it was loud, because it was calm, because he believed it. Every word. He believed she was nothing. And maybe for a moment, sitting in that dark kitchen, she almost believed it too. Almost. Rachel sat in the dark for a long time after he hung up. The phone screen went dim. The kitchen clock ticked. Then she picked up the phone again, scrolled through her contacts, and found the number she had saved 3 days before the funeral, but never dialed. Philip Pemberton, attorney at law. She pressed call. The office was in downtown Charleston, 12th floor. Clean lines, dark wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the harbor. Philip Pemberton was a tall man in his 60s with silver temples, a navy suit that fit like it was born on him, and the calm, measured voice of someone who had been keeping secrets for a very long time. He opened a leather folder and laid it all out. The trust structure, the share certificates, the account statements, the board resolutions. Rachel's name was on every single one. Mabel had updated the trust 3 months before she died, while she still had the strength to sign her own name. "Your grandmother spent 40 years protecting this," Philip said quietly. "What you do with it now is yours to decide." Rachel sat still for a long time. She did not cry. She did not gasp. She just sat there, hands folded in her lap, staring at her grandmother's signature at the bottom of the last page. That careful, steady script. The same handwriting that signed her permission slips for school field trips. The same handwriting on every birthday card Rachel ever received. Then she asked one question. The pendant Callum took. "Does it matter legally?" Philip shook his head. "The pendant is sentimental. The real power is in the documents, the shares, and the board seat." Rachel nodded slowly. But something moved behind her eyes. Something older than anger. That pendant was not just gold. It was her mother's heartbeat. It was her grandmother's faith. It was the quiet pulse of 3 generations of women who chose silence over spectacle and built an empire that nobody saw. And right now, at this very moment, it was hanging around the neck of a woman who wore it to brunch like a party favor. Rachel stood up. She shook Philip's hand. And when she walked out of that office, she walked differently. Not faster, not louder, just certain. Like a woman who finally understood the weight of what she had been carrying her whole life. 3 weeks passed. Rachel moved like water. She did not confront Callum. She did not post a cryptic message on social media. She did not call Lorraine back or respond to Monica's sudden awkward text messages that tried to sound friendly after months of cruelty. She met with Philip 2 more times, reviewed every line of the portfolio, asked questions about board governance, voting rights, and fiduciary structures that made the lawyers sit up straighter in their chairs. She was not just inheriting money. She was learning to lead. She accepted her seat on the board of Hargrove Global Mining in a private session that made no headlines and generated no press. She bought a new dress. Black, simple, cut clean at the shoulders. Nothing flashy, nothing loud. She got her hair done, pulled back smooth, the way Mabel used to wear hers on Sundays before church. She stood in front of the mirror in her grandmother's bedroom, and for a moment, she did not see herself. She saw Mabel. The same jawline, the same steady eyes, the same quiet fire. Then she waited. Callum's annual Investors Gala was coming. His biggest event of the year. A rented ballroom at the Whitmore Hotel in Buckhead. 300 guests. Developers, bankers, politicians. Callum had been chasing a deal with a development group called Pinnacle Partners for months. This gala was his audition, his moment. The night he believed would change everything. Rachel was not invited, but she did not need an invitation. She had something better. She had a phone call from the lead developer at Pinnacle, who had learned through board channels exactly who Rachel Hargrove Whitfield was, and he wanted her there. The night of the gala, Callum was in his element. Dark suit, gold cufflinks, a glass of champagne in his right hand, and a firm handshake in his left. He moved through the room like a man who owned it, even though every inch of it was rented. Lorraine trailed behind him in a sequin jacket, telling anyone who would listen that her son was about to change the Atlanta skyline. Monica floated between tables taking selfies and tagging locations, and Tessa stood beside Callum in a fitted black gown, the pendant resting against her chest like she had earned it, like it belonged there, like Mabel had never existed. Then, the ballroom doors opened. Rachel walked in alone. No entourage, no announcement, no dramatic music, just a woman in a black dress walking through a set of double doors like she had every right to be there. Because she did. She did not rush. She did not scan the room looking for familiar faces. She moved through the crowd like water through stone. Calm, quiet, and completely unstoppable. A few heads turned, then a few more. Then the whole room started shifting in her direction, like gravity had rearranged itself around her. There was something different about her that people could not name but could not ignore. It was not confidence exactly. It was certainty. The certainty of a woman who knows something the room has not figured out yet. Callum saw her from across the room and laughed. He leaned into Tessa and whispered, "She actually showed up. Watch this." He walked toward Rachel with his chest out, his shoulders squared, and his voice pitched just loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. "Rachel, this is a private event. You are embarrassing yourself." Rachel looked at him. Not with anger, not with sadness. She looked at him the way you look at a child who does not understand what he is holding. Then she said, quietly but clearly, "Actually, I was invited by the developer you have been trying to impress all night." Callum blinked. His smile froze. Before he could recover, the lead developer from Pinnacle Partners stepped forward from the crowd. He extended his hand to Rachel and shook it warmly. "Miss Harrove Whitfield," he said. "Thank you for coming tonight. The board's interest in the Downtown Corridor project means a great deal to us." The ballroom went silent. The kind of silence that starts at one table and spreads like a cold wind across every conversation in the room. Callum's mouth opened. Nothing came out. He looked at the developer. He looked at Rachel. He looked at the faces around him, faces that had been hanging on his every word all night, now turned toward his wife with a kind of recognition that he had never received himself. Rachel did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She spoke the way Mabel spoke, low, steady, and impossible to ignore. Like a woman who had rehearsed nothing because the truth does not need practice. She told the room not to humiliate, not to perform, but because 15 years of silence had to end somewhere, that she was the majority shareholder and newly seated board member of Hargrove Global Mining. That her grandmother, the woman Callum called that old woman, the woman he could not be bothered to visit while she was dying, had spent her entire life protecting a legacy worth more than every deal and every handshake in that ballroom combined. That her great-grandmother before that had built something from nothing in an era that tried to make women like her invisible and had succeeded anyway. And that the pendant Callum ripped off Rachel's neck at her grandmother's graveside and clasped around his mistress's throat was not a trinket. It was a generational covenant, a symbol passed from great-grandmother to grandmother to granddaughter, a symbol of women who chose dignity over volume and let the world underestimate them on purpose. Then she turned to Tessa, and this was the moment the entire room held its breath. Rachel did not shout. She did not point. She did not lean forward or clench her fists. She looked at Tessa with something that was not anger. It was closer to pity. "You can keep the necklace," Rachel said. It was never about the gold. It was about what it represented. And clearly, that is something you will never understand. Tessa's hand went to the pendant. Her fingers closed around it tight, like she was afraid someone was going to snatch it off her neck the way Callum had snatched it off Rachel's. But Rachel was not reaching. She had already turned away. She looked at Callum one last time. The man who told her she was nothing, who humiliated her over her grandmother's open grave, who spent 15 years pretending she was a placeholder for the life he thought he deserved. "My lawyer will be in touch regarding the divorce," she said calmly. "And Callum, the house. It was paid off years ago through an account you never knew existed. It is mine. It always was." Callum's face collapsed. Not slowly, like a man processing bad news. All at once. Like a building with its foundation ripped out from underneath. Rachel turned and walked toward the exit. The lead developer fell into step beside her. 2 Pinnacle executives followed. Then 3 more guests. The room began to empty around Callum like water draining from a cracked tub. He stood in the center of that ballroom, with Tessa on his right and Lorraine on his left. And for the first time in his life, nobody was looking at him. What happened next did not happen with fireworks or headlines. It happened with silence. The slow, grinding, inescapable silence of a man watching his entire life come apart, one thread at a time. The Pinnacle deal disappeared. Quietly. Completely. Like it had never been there at all. Callum called the developer before sunrise the next morning. Once, twice, 6 times in a row. Every call went straight to voicemail. By noon, his tone had changed. By evening, he was standing in the lobby of Pinnacle's office building, jaw tight, phone in hand, forcing a smile at a receptionist who would not meet his eyes. 10 minutes later, security asked him to leave. Investors pulled out, one after another. Meetings were canceled. Emails went unanswered. Contracts that once felt secure suddenly needed revisiting. One afternoon, Callum walked into a conference room expecting to close a deal. 3 empty chairs were waiting for him. No explanation, no apology, just absence. His firm had always been built on perception, on confidence, on the illusion that things were always moving forward. And the moment that illusion cracked, everything underneath it started to show. Within 4 months, foreclosure notices sat unopened on his kitchen counter. Tessa lasted 11 days after the gala. At first, she stayed quiet, observing, watching the calls slow down, watching the invitations stop, watching Callum's confidence crack around the edges. On the 11th night, Callum found her in the bedroom packing. "What are you doing?" She did not look up. "Leaving." Callum let out a short laugh. "Stop playing." She zipped the bag. "I am not." Something in her tone made him step closer. "This is temporary. Deals fall through all the time. I will fix it." That was when she finally looked at him. No anger, no sadness, just clarity. "I did not come here for temporary," she said. "I came here for what you had." The words did not land all at once. They sank slowly, heavy. Tessa picked up her bag, walked past him, and paused just long enough to place something on the dresser. The pendant. She did not say goodbye. By the time the front door closed, Callum was still standing there, staring at the necklace, finally understanding what it meant to be left behind without explanation. He did not chase her, because for the first time there was nowhere left to run. Lorraine and Monica scrambled. Suddenly, the woman they had spent years belittling was the most powerful person they had ever been connected to. Lorraine called Rachel's phone 6 times in a single week. Each voicemail was sweeter than the last. "Baby, you know we are family. I always told Callum you were special, sweetheart. Call me back, honey. Let us put all this behind us." Rachel did not respond to a single one. She had her attorney send a formal cease and desist letter to both Lorraine and Monica. Professional, clean, final. Not out of cruelty, not out of spite, because Rachel was done. Done performing for people who only valued her when they discovered she had value. Done smiling through insults at her own dinner table. Done. Monica went through her social media that night and deleted every single post she had ever made about Callum and Tessa. Every photo, every caption, every heart emoji, every story highlight. She scrubbed her timeline clean like a crime scene. But consequences do not need a screenshot. They do not need a receipt. They just need time. And time had been watching the whole time. Callum's final chapter was the quietest of all. The house now belonged to Rachel, legally, fully, and without dispute. She did not sell it. She did not torch it. She simply had the locks changed and let her attorney handle the rest. Callum moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in a part of Atlanta he used to drive through without glancing out the window. One evening, sitting on a folding chair in that empty apartment with nothing but a half-empty bottle and a cardboard box of things Rachel's lawyer had sent over, he found it. The velvet pouch. The pendant. Tessa's silent return. He opened the locket for the first time. He had never opened it before. Not once. Not when he ripped it off Rachel's neck. Not when he clasped it around Tessa. He treated it like jewelry. Like metal and chain. Like something with a price tag instead of a heartbeat. Inside was a tiny photograph. Mabel holding baby Rachel. Both of them smiling at someone behind the camera. Morning light coming through what looked like a kitchen window. That same kitchen in Harlan. That same house. On the other side of the locket, engraved in script so small Callum had to squint to read it, were the words, "For my Rachel. Everything I am is yours." Callum stared at that photo for a long time. He ran his thumb across Mabel's face. He closed the locket gently, like it might break if he held it too hard. And for the first time, maybe the only honest moment he had had in years, he understood exactly what he had destroyed. Not a marriage, not an inheritance, not a business connection. A love so deep and so patient that it had been pressed into gold and passed from hand to hand across 3 generations of women who never needed the world to see them shine. He set the locket on the table, and he sat in that silence for a very, very long time. Rachel went back to South Carolina. She sat on her grandmother's porch in the old rocking chair, the one with the worn armrests and the creak on the left side that Mabel never fixed, because she said it sounded like music. The pendant was back around Rachel's neck now. Returned. Reclaimed. Restored. She touched it sometimes without thinking, the way Mabel used to. Absently. Like checking that something precious was still there. She did not do interviews. She did not hold press conferences. She did not post transformation photos or write a tell-all memoir. That was not who Mabel raised. That was not who Rachel was. Instead, she built something quietly, the way her great-grandmother built something, the way her grandmother protected it. She established the Mabel Hargrove Foundation. Scholarships for girls from small towns who were smart and quiet and overlooked. Girls who read books by flashlight on porches like this one. Girls who reminded Rachel of herself at 14, full of dreams she did not have words for yet, standing in the gap between what the world saw and what she knew she could become. She funded community centers. She invested in small businesses run by women who had been told they were not enough. She did all of it quietly, out of sight, the way Mabel would have wanted. The way Estelle started it 60 years ago. Invisible to the world, but essential to everything that grew from it. One evening, as the sun dropped below the tree line and the crickets started their nightly chorus, Rachel sat in that rocking chair and opened the locket. She looked at the photograph inside. Her grandmother's face. Her own baby face. That kitchen window light. She whispered, "I understand now, Grandma," and the breeze moved through the porch like a hand across her cheek. Soft, warm, brief, but unmistakable. Mabel did not hide her wealth because she was afraid of it. She hid it because she wanted to see who would love her granddaughter when they believed there was nothing to gain. She wanted to know who would stand beside Rachel when there was no fortune to leverage, no name to borrow, no power to impress. She chose the oldest test there is, the test of being seen as nothing. And the answer broke her heart. But it set Rachel free, because sometimes the richest woman in the room is the one nobody notices. Sometimes the strongest person at the table is the one who has not spoken yet. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in a world that wants you to scream is to stay quiet long enough to let the truth speak for you. Rachel never chased revenge. She never needed to. She simply stood still and let the truth fall where it belonged. And when it was over, when the noise faded, when the betrayers scattered, when the ballroom emptied, she was still standing, still wearing the pendant, still her mother's daughter, still her grandmother's legacy. And that was more than enough. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and turn on notifications so the next one finds you the moment it drops.